Yep, cool. Let's get started.
Yeah, there you go. We are ready.
Awesome. I invite the first speaker from the affirming team to begin this debate.
The world is not as confusing or complicated as it may seem. On side affirming, we think that there are certain things which you can teach children which will be good when they are children, which will be good when they are adults, and that these lessons are things which should be reinforced throughout their lifetimes. 3 things in this speech. First of all, set up and stance. What do we stand for and what are we going to be talking about in this debate? Second of all, why we think that Disney optimism is going to be a good way to reinforce moral actions for children when they're young. And second of all, on why we think that adults can then take these messages to a lesser extent and apply them in their lives as a toolbox for making decisions. So first of all, what do we think that this media generally looks like? We think that children's media is probably going to look like not simple, but fairly straightforward storylines created to appeal to children because that is what adults will want their children to watch, and that's what children will want to watch because they'll get confused if things are too complicated or difficult, or for slightly older children, it'll look like, again, content which doesn't possess mature themes, and we think that this content is probably not only gatekept by adults who have some control over what their children are engaging with because they control things like blocking settings on their computers or settings on their TVs, but second of all, it's probably gatekept by the creators who understand that they should just create good content for children because there is no real motivation for them just to create content which represents people as doing like heinously bad things and then being rewarded by that. So moving on then, why do we think that children are likely to be influenced by this media? First of all, 3 mechanisms here. First of all, children have very little life experience beyond the media that they have experienced, right? Children haven't had lives to live. They have had lives where they've been walking around, spending time in school, maybe spending time with their parents. This means that everything that they're introduced to in media is a new and novel concept, and it is one which has no point of comparison, therefore they're more likely to accept it than people who are older. Second of all, children haven't been exposed to things like critical lenses or criticism in general. This means that when they examine things without the guidance of an adult, they are more likely to accept themes, or as I will explain later, pick out certain things which specifically appeal to them and take that as the moral lesson when there is no clear reinforcement. Thirdly, we think that they are developing minds, right? When I am a child, I just do not have the same capacity as an adult to critically question what I'm watching or what I am engaging with because I still have a developing mind and I am still start learning how to understand the world. Before I move on, I'll take your POI before I move on.
Would you support Disney optimism in all media?
Yeah. We prefer a world with Disney optimism. Exactly. So, moving on. What happens when why is Disney optimism uniquely good at reinforcing these moral messages? 2 things here. First of all, we think that Disney optimism presents a very clear reward and punishment system. Right? If I am like a king, for example, in a film which represents Disney optimism, if I have morals which say that I should not just hurt people randomly, which say that, I should treat people fairly, then I will be rewarded at the end of the story by succeeding over my opponents. We think this provides a very clear framework for children to assess not only who they should be rooting for in this story, because they will be framed as someone who is more appealing by the creators of the film, but also and provides the children an understanding that maybe if they do these good things, they will be given rewards, right? The comparative here is that in Ghibli optimism, there is no clear reward and punishment structure. People do lots of different things, but they generally don't get punished or rewarded at the end. Therefore, no specific moral message is reinforcing Ghibli optimism. The issue here is children now have to pick out and choose which moral messages they take away from it. While this could look like them taking away that, peace and optimistic resolutions are really good things, that means they could also pick out things like, well, maybe it's okay if I hit someone if they said something mean to me, right? Because that isn't that kind of retaliation would be reinforced by something like Ghibli media because the child has to make the decision for what is good or bad, what they will be rewarded for in real life for themselves. Second of all, we think it teaches you good things insofar as it is a form of reinforcement, right? Like when a child sees like people who appeal to them doing lots of things, and they're probably like likely to want to repeat these. Again, the comparison on Ghibli media here is that when I'm a child watching this, I don't know clearly what I should take away from this. So it's not only just that I am unclear what I should do, like what I should action from this, but I am also unclear what even the message is after watching a film from Ghibli media, right? Like, is it right that No Face ate all of these people and then vomited them back out, but it's okay because now he's living in a nice little witch's cottage, right? What is the message that I am supposed to take away from that as a child, other than confusion and maybe the idea that sometimes it's okay to swallow people whole? Finally, when I'm talking about general, which it is, hear me. So talking about general behavior, right? First of all, we think that this this is most relevant for children and should weigh very highly because, as I'll explain later, children are far less critical than adults, so children's media will have the biggest impact on their behavior, right? If I'm on the playground or I'm spending time with my parents, with my friends in school, and I'm a child, I'm probably going to model my behavior to some extent on media. Second of all, we think that as I'll explain later, they're going to grow up and understand and reinforce these messages. Second of all, we think that generally there is a good group dynamic in this because when I'm creating stories, I probably want them to appeal to lots of people, so I want to have lots of good guys people can relate to. But second of all, because we think that it's more realistic to present a group as succeeding and striving, and children want to, and positive things like friendship are really appealing to children because they want to have a sense of connection. We think that this probably reinforces a lot of cooperation between people and behaving well. Again, we think that this parish is unclear on their side of the house because they need to support Ghibli media, where there is none of this clear cooperation between people. Again, going back to something like Spirited Away, sure, there's a peaceful resolution at the end, but the protagonist has to go through a series of fraught relationships where there are no clear allegiances, where the value of cooperation is not clearly demonstrated. Therefore, we do not think that this is reinforced as highly. At the end of this point, I think it should be very clear that when Disney media is more prevalent, children are more likely to behave well as children. Moving on to adults. 3 reasons why adults are far more critical than children. First of all, I actually have life experience to compare, right? When I'm an adult, I've probably done things like have relationships, have friendships, talk to friends and family. The result of this is that I actually have a baseline understanding of what the world is like, so I'm not just going to take these messages at face value. Second of all, we think that you are able to take that even though you often sometimes internalize these messages that you have as a child, that when you internalize things, as an adult, you are actually able to take all of those things and weigh up the potential benefits of them, right? Like, in complicated relationships, I can take the message that I should cooperate with people and I should not hurt people with provocation, and I can reconcile them because I'm an intelligent individual who's able to question my basic assumptions. And finally, we think that it is actually a benefit on our side of the house insofar as I have this toolbox of basic things, right? Because children are largely informed by media. When we know the general things which children are being taught, and we think that it is very clear that those things will be reinforced in them as an adult, and the result of this is that they're more likely to behave in cooperation with them. Again, the comparison here is that they do not have that toolbox of moral ideas that they can use when evaluating something, so it is not clear what they should value or what they should do. But even if as an adult they do decide what it is clear that they should do or what they should value, we think that that is only the same as on our side of the house. At the end of this debate,
Awesome, I thank the speaker for that speech, and I call upon the first speaker of the negative team to deliver their case.
Sorry, no, I got it.
In Disney optimism, the only way out is for the villain to die. Team Hawke's Bay supports children being taught realistic and positive messages in the media. 3 substantive points for you today. Firstly, how do we better engage young audiences? Secondly, how do we better improve children's behavior? And thirdly, Isabella will provide you a split on how we get more enjoyable and high quality media. Before I get into my rebuttal or my points, some modeling for you. Firstly, what does our world look like? Our world looks like where majority of the media, books, movies, TV, use like Ghibli optimism principle, which is seen like in the information slide. Examples of this look like shows such as Bluey, in the Night Garden. Moving on to some 3 key points of rebuttals that I'll be offering in this debate. Firstly, we got presented with the idea that protagonists have to go through many relationships, have to go through many hardships, and at the end there is no clear understanding of what happens. Okay, let's say that happens, but that is way better than having an ending where a protagonist has to kill or has to defeat another protagonist just for the sake of winning. We see in Spirited Away that the main character has a character development where she understands how living is without her parents, without the support of her parents, how she has to get through life. That is way better than what we get on Their Side of the House. Secondly, they say that there's a clear reward and punishment system that is good on Their Side of the House. We tell you that this is untrue because then children have this idea in their mind that they have to do something good to get a reward, that they have to do something bad to get a punishment. This means that they are constantly afraid of doing something bad. This is really bad because we want children to make mistakes so that they can learn from them, so that they can adapt and become better functioning adults when they go out in the real world. Okay. Moving on to my substantives, firstly, on how we better engage a young audience. In this point, we prove to you that we engage the most amount of children in a stimulating way that is good for them, which is how we win this debate. First mechanism under this point, the media is more stimulating for young minds. What does this look like in Ghibli media? You're needing to draw your own conclusions as children because Ghibli optimism doesn't make it for you. This is extremely important because you decide what is good and what is bad. If nothing is like good about it, children have the capacity to understand these concepts in an age appropriate way where they can understand what is a good concept and what is a bad concept for themselves. We see this in the playground when children make decisions of their own. For example, who do I want to be friends with? What good characters and what characteristics and traits do they show, which is why I want to be bad. On the comparative, you know from the very start which character is good, which character is bad. You know the bad actor will always take down, the good actor will always take down the bad actor, which is extremely bad because on our side of the house, we actually see and we actually draw conclusions instead of them being handed to us. Secondly, the difference between fictional and the real world. Children mimic what they see in fiction because they do not understand how reality and how their real life works. This is because this is seen where children proclaim that, oh, I want to be a princess, I want to be Spider-Man. Why is this? Because as the affirming team has said, they don't have enough life experiences and prior knowledge to what is real and what is not. What this means uniquely on our side of the house is children take what they learn from media and apply it in the playground. That they do not see this really big concept of bad and good and evil. They see people for the characteristics and traits that they are. Thirdly, relatability. We get more engaging media for children to see realistic comparisons in their old life. Why is this important? This means that this represents a variety of experiences. This isn't just a trope where a bully is just a bully and they're a bully because they were born a bully. This means that a bully became a bully because of the external factors that affected them, because of their home life, because of things that have happened in their own lives. This is extremely important for children to understand because it gives them a grasp and understanding of how people work and how the real life works. On the comparative, there's good and bad. There's both parties are meant to be like one thing, where on our side of the house, parties can be both good and evil, which is extremely important for children to understand. Yeah, before I move on to my outcomes, I'll take that view.
Yeah, so are you standing against the concept of a child clearly knowing that lying, cheating, stealing, and hitting your friends are bad things?
Okay, to respond to that, let's say, okay, stealing is a really bad thing, but say a child needs to understand that if someone is really stealing something, maybe they're stealing something out of like poverty, out of like desperation, out of need for what they need. This is extremely why these external factors are extremely important to our side of the house, which you just don't get on their side of the house, because they have this clear understanding of good and evil. Okay, moving on to the outcomes of this point. Firstly, you're engaged and stimulated on like this you're like, when you have like good and evil, you're likely like bored and frustrated. This means that children have pent up emotions, which is which is not good for like their home environment or their school environment, because this means that they cannot take like information in and develop as children. Secondly, children learn through media, right? So if you're not engaging in media, you're not going to consume it. On our side of the house, children consume media because they find it engaging. They improve like literacy skills because they're engaging media through reading. They get better and they become more functioning adults. Okay, third outcome, benefits of positivity and like Ghibli media are something that I'll prove like stronger in my next point. Okay. Second point, how do we improve children's behavior? Firstly, peaceful conflict and resolution. We think that like children often have conflicts, right? In the playground, children are like, oh, this person's bad, they stole my sandwich, or they went on the slide before me. Children like fight over the most like unserious of things. Ghibli optimism encourages peaceful conflict resolution. Like Disney optimism tells you that if someone's doing something inherently wrong, you have to fight them because you're the good guy, and you have to fight them because that is the only way to defeat like evil. On our side of the house, we tell you that this isn't the only way to like resolve it. You can like talk. Ghibli encourages you to talk to your parents, consult like an adult, think about your feelings, and talk them out before you actually go and take something upon yourself. Okay. Secondly, how does this like change your perception of yourself and other people? When Disney optimism paints a clear binary between good and bad, every action you have or every action someone else would take could paint you as a villain. Someone takes the wrong step and boom, they're a villain. Oh, you went on the slide before me? It was my turn. Oh no, you're a villain. I need to take you down. I need to fight you. This puts a high burden on children, as I flagged in my rebuttal, to act perfect all the time. We do not want this for children, because children need to learn from their mistakes. They need to understand about real life. This is like an example of like Ska, where like the opposition paints like good and evil really badly, where like children are like incentivized to think about this. Okay, some of the outcomes of this point: we get more compassionate children on our side of this house. When someone is bad, children think about why they are bad and how they can help them, which is why I'm very proud to negate the whole step.
Awesome, I thank the speaker for that speech, and I call upon the second speaker from the affirmative team.
Okay, two things for you in the speech. The first being sort of a clarification on what does this media look like, and sort of I'll address the engagement issue there. And the second being what happens to the behavior changes of children and therefore adults in the future. So under this first point, what does the media actually look like? So the best push we've had from NEG is that children just won't watch media that's not relatable to them, and that they will be disengaged from Disney movies because they are really optimistic. our favorite thing on this team is a sense check, right? Every single kid loves Disney movies, right? They are so engaging. Every kid loves watching them. They watch them all the time. They watch them with their friends. And like we see iPad kids these days, right? Every time you're eating a meal, you're watching a TV show. And in 90% of cases, that show is providing you some sort of Disney optimism narrative where there is like clear good and bad characters, right? Because we think that is the majority of media that is presented for very young children, and this Ghibli style media comes in the status quo for much older children. So we think that the engagement point is just not that relevant, because most kids find these things interesting when there are bright colors and that like there are pretty pictures, and that's enough for a kid to be engrossed in a story, right? They have an infinite imagination. The second point under here is about what are the actual storylines that we are being presented with. So we think that it's not the case on our side of the house that there is no variability in storylines and that everyone is just like always good and always bad, and that there's no ability to have little things, for example, like a bully only being a bully because of their past experiences. We think that that's an incorrect characterization, because we think that if you are like in a Disney optimistic world, a bully is characterized as a bad person, and that is a bad characteristic to be bullying someone. And then often the TV show or the movie will go on to describe what they can do to be better to become a good person. So we think that we're not always characterizing bad people as bad forever. However, we are characterizing this, like we are making it clear that that bullying behavior is bad, no matter what the reasons were for it, and then making it clear that there are good things that they can do to repair that behavior. There are ways that they can become a good person afterwards. I think the same sort of logic applies to their like stealing being like good and bad in different sorts of situations. Then there's this point about punishment, right? They've the push from Neg has been that in all Disney movies, the villain is killed at the end of it, and that's how we know that like justice has been served. We think this is incorrect again, because we think there are a range of different ways that we justify that someone is bad in a movie. For example, they can be like put in prison, they can like not be friends with anyone anymore. We think there are like a range of different ways that that we represent this punishment, and therefore it's not always to the extreme extent that Neg is trying to point out. And so we think kids aren't just going to go and kill people because they bullied them. So where are we at the end of this point? We've proven to you that this media is still engaging, so we like don't lose any of those benefits that Neg has tried to characterize for you, and we prove that like it's not just this binary narrative anyway. I'll take a POI before I move on.
Do you support violence, i.e. Marvel movie fights, in a Disney optimism?
We think Marvel movie fights are like sort of aside from the question, because then they don't provide clear framing of whether characters are good or bad, because there's like a lot of violence in those movies. So we think those aren't the sort of media we're talking about, because we're talking about the media that's addressed towards younger children. So, this point about behavior changes, which is the most important in this debate, right? The reason why children consume, we create this media is to hope that these children will turn out as good people. As I've told you with iPad kids, right? These kids are consuming this media so often, it's so reinforced into them that it's going to have an effect on their behavior in the long run. We've also seen that, like, if as much as your parent is going to tell you that you shouldn't, like, be mean and, like, you should always share with your friends, if you're like the media you're consuming is so much more frequent than that messaging from your parents, that has to be where the good values are actually coming from in this day and age. So what are the incentives here? We see that in Ghibli media, there's like, no matter the ratio of good and bad in a person and in a situation, we always reach a peaceful compromise, right? So there's like no ability for a child to understand that like, as long as I'm like the tiniest bit good, I'll get to a mediocre scenario in the end, right? There's no disincentive for them to actually like not do bad things, because no matter the ratio, there's always some sort of okay ending in the end. And we think that that is really bad for children, right? They should know that if they do bad things, there will be bad consequences, right? Because that is actually how the real world operates. We also think the the incentives for good things come up a lot more on our side of the house, right? Because you can actually see a good character with good characteristics and good elements, and then like good things happen to them. They're like, their friends love them, and like they have a happy family, and like they can go on and have like a fun career and like save lives. So we think that if children are able to see these good things happening to people who do good things, we think they're more likely to want to do it also. If we come to this point of conflict resolution then, so the push from NEG has been that we don't support conflict resolution because there's no way that anyone can still be like, that there can be a different scenario to just like good versus evil and good always winning. We think this is incorrect again because we think under our side of the house, with conflict resolution, we see behaviors that are modeled of good conflict resolution, right? Instead of on their side of the house, a method of conflict resolution being like going to war with another group of people and that being seen as potentially a good way to mediate the conflict, we see here like good conflict resolution is modeled by like talking to someone and like asking them like, maybe we can like sort this out a different way. Because if we are like, we have to characterize good and bad behaviors on our side of the house. And so if you are like, under our side of the house exclusively, you have bad conflict resolution, such as like hitting people because they were mean to you, characterized as bad. We encourage good conflict resolution because we encourage better behaviors there also. So just to talk about the reason why this is really, really important is because when you are a child, you like have to make these decisions on a day-to-day basis of like, is this someone I want to be friends with? Is this not someone I want to be friends with? Is this a good behavior? Is it a bad behavior, right? On our side of the house, we exclusively have these clear models of good and bad behavior that allow you to make these judgments. Yes, in your real life, you will never encounter someone who is perfectly perfect or perfectly bad. There will always be elements of both, but you will be unable to recognize those elements of both unless you have those models in the first place, right? Because on the comparative, the outcomes are always unclear. It's always unclear what actually factors contributed to those outcomes, and so you don't know what are the good things you should be looking for or not. So adults end up being like paralyzed because these scenarios and logics that they've been learning for their whole life don't actually apply to real life scenarios, right? They can't actually transfer the logic of conflict resolution. They can't transfer the logic of good outcomes and bad outcomes to the real world, and so they're like, on the outside of the house, they're less likely to take bad actions in the end, and they're able to take a stand on doing bad things.
Awesome, I thank the speaker for that speech, and I call upon the second speaker from the negative team.
It's okay, I'll just hang on 1 second. Okay. We just heard at second affirmative that in an ideal situation, we don't go to all-out war, we talk it out. That is the kind of thing that is exactly the thing we stand for on side negating. Why is this? Because what they have to stand for is good triumphing over evil. This means that if the best solution is a win-win scenario, they simply cannot stand for that. On our side of the house, we talk it out, we get a compromise, and that is the most realistic solution, as that is often what works best because it means that everybody wins instead of just one party. That is ultimately what we stand for on side negating. A couple of things I'm going to be talking about in my speech. I think firstly, just talking about the realisticness of the sort of morals and whether or not the punishments are going to result in good outcomes for you. Secondly, about how the messages are spread and how they are received and what kind of messages we're getting on both sides of the house, and the influence of the media. Before moving on to my split about enjoyable, high quality media. So I think firstly on the realisticness of media. A lot of their material, right, is reliant on these morals always being realistic, always being, and the punishment that if you do something good, you will always get the reward you expect. If you do something bad, you will always get the punishment you expect. Why isn't this realistic? Well, firstly, we tell you due to cultural differences, right? It means that maybe you do something that you, or the media you consume deems bad, but the people that you interact with come from a different culture. We think an example of this is the typical Western selfishness in which you prioritize yourself. That is not the same in many other cultures in which putting other people before you and prioritizing family and community is much more important. Therefore, in the Western world, maybe you get rewarded for thinking about how you're going to improve yourself and focusing on yourself, whereas you don't in the other side of the house. What does this mean? It means that all of their mechanisms about reward versus punishment doesn't actually come to fruition. It means that when children don't get the reward they expect, they are ultimately frustrated. What child is going to want to try again and carry on doing a good behavior if even once they don't get the exact reward that they are expecting for the behavior? However, on our side of the house, we tell you that what we actually get with Ghibli is that we get if you do something good, the kind of outcome is a positive relationship. Because you're able to have people working together, you are able to have these win-win situations, you are able to build more positive relationships that don't put other people at the detriment. That is the incentive on our side of the house for children to continue doing good behavior, regardless of whether or not they are going to get punished. And just secondly, in terms of the reward and punishment, we think another reason why this is likely to differ is just life experiences. Even if you grew up in New Zealand your entire life and all your family did, we think there's vastly different experiences from if you're from Wellington or if you're from Hawke's Bay, right? And that can influence the kind of morals and values that you are likely to get. And then just secondly, moving on to how we get the ideas and the messages. I think the main push we heard from the affirmative team is to say that you only get your morals from your media, or that is the best way you are able to get them. Yeah. I think the second response that we heard from the affirmative when they tell us that morals are best enforced by media and not by your parents is probably the best one, so I'm going to respond to this. We tell you that actually morals and being enforced by media is not the best way possible, and I think it's all of the largely unresponded to material from Anshika about how when you are consuming media, it needs to be stimulating your brain. We think that Ghibli allows you to draw your own conclusions. It allows you to think through what is going to be happening. It allows you to relate to the media more because it is more realistic to your actual life, which means you're thinking about it not just when you're consuming the media, but you're thinking about it in the future. Ultimately, this means the sort of morals that are enforced by Disney optimism are just short-lived and aren't actually being kept inside of your brain. But also we tell you that you don't just get the basic morals that you get out of Disney optimism from media. We tell you that parents often prioritize the basic morals because this is what all the parent books are telling you, right? Your kid needs to know not to hit someone. Also at school, it's often focused on very black and white rules, keep your hands to yourself. Ghibli media fills in the blanks. It fills in the complexity of the world in which different ideas of morality will come across. We get these basic morals from a variety of other places, but we uniquely are able to understand the complexity of different life experiences through Ghibli media, and that is why it is so, so important. And then just lastly, on the influence of the media. I think all of the stuff they were talking about, how media influences you and you're able to learn stuff and you is extremely symmetric, right? Which means Ghibli media is able to influence children. But we think that we widen the gap and Ghibli is able to help people more because of the way it stimulates their brains, which again has gone really unresponded to. But what did we hear? The main response was just to say, well, no, it doesn't matter if it's engaging because kids love Disney movies. Kids also love Cocomelon. Does that mean that we want them to be learning lessons from Coco Melon? It does not. What we actually want, I think they misread what we say engaging, we mean stimulating. And Anshika said that in her speech. We want kids to be able to be stimulated so that they are taking in and considering all the information they are learning about critical thinking skills, about being engaged and stimulated so that you learn how to read. These are extremely important skills that we get on our side of the house, rather than kids just mindlessly watching Coco Melon. If we don't have children gaining literacy skills at a high rate, they literally fall behind as adults, and that is so bad for their prospects and careers. And just lastly, they had like a major focus on adults, right? And they said that we want children to be able to take the skills that they learn into their later in life. But we think that actually this is where the Ghibli material becomes even more critical, right? Because you travel when you're an adult. You go and work for global corporations like, McDonald's or Microsoft, and you gain and you interact with a variety of people from around the world. And that is when you need to have that concept and understanding of different ideas of morality. Before I move on, I will take a POI.
Yeah, how does a 5-year-old evaluate a situation in which they punch someone and still end up with a relatively okay outcome?
You ask them, why did you do that? You say, how are you feeling? I'm feeling sad, and you talk out your feelings, and then perhaps you find out that kid has had a bad day because they're facing trauma and abuse in their personal life, and you get to the best possible outcome. Just onto my split about how you enjoy high quality media, about how we get more enjoyable high quality media. We think that basically Disney optimism is just a singular trope, and it reduces the quality of media. When we use Ghibli optimism, we get things like more paths and more plots that you are able to explore. We get a variety of tropes used to explain behavior, rather than lazy writing that puts it simply down to either you are good or you are evil. Ultimately, what we get as a result of this, our children are likely to be engaged in media, but also just to extend on this, they're likely to see the importance of media and arts as a form of self-expression, as a way to engage with the world, as a way to put yourself out there and also to understand about other people around you. It also means that writers on our side of the house are likely more engaged. Parents, right? Parents are having to watch this media. If we have higher quality media, perhaps the parent sits down with their kid in front of the TV, they watch the movie. This is critical bonding time that you get to have with your child in a world in which you are constantly working, in which you're going through the monotony of your day-to-day life. I'm not sure I'd want to come home and then sit down and watch a random Disney movie. I want to watch engaging and high quality media with my child, in which we both learn something and in which we both become better people.
That's my time to speak for that speech, and I call upon the third speaker from side affirmative.
AF definitely doesn't stand for child abuse, and we don't stand for violence against children in any form. But what we also don't stand for is a world where a child believes that an appropriate emotional response to feeling stressed is to hit someone else. We can understand why they would feel that in the Ghibli world, because in the Ghibli world you're told that, well, no matter what you do, if you're good, if you're bad, if you're somewhere in between, your outcome is somewhere in between, which we actually don't see as a benefit. What we see as a benefit is raising a generation of children who believe in morals, who believe that when you do a good thing, you get a good outcome. And we believe in a world that incentivizes, through positive and negative reinforcement, genuinely positive ideas and being a good person. We've broadly got 3 points of clash here. We've got engagement and a little clear up on triumph that I'm going to do before that, and then sort of the influence that we have on children's morals, the influence on adults. I think that the influence on children's morals is the most important here, because we've generally been speaking about children, our effects on them. We see them as a primary stakeholder, but we also see the adult's point as holding pretty high weight, because, you spend 60 years as an adult, 20 as a child. So we do actually, or 10 as a child. So we do actually care what we look like on adults. But let's just look at engagement. We've heard some material that it is logically prior that we need engaging children's books and media, because people are not going to consume that media if it's not engaging. We think that the flaw here is that we're looking at what is engaging based off of we as people with fully or at least partially developed prefrontal cortexes see as engaging. For a child, that's not the same thing. For a child, we can still have like vague twists and turns and stuff. We can still have plot twists. But at the end of the day, we actually don't want children consuming stressful media that they can't understand, that is confusing, that they can't take away a real moral from. It is so unsatisfying to watch a 2-hour movie and have no idea what you just saw because the people you were rooting for the entire time kind of got bad stuff, and then the people who you were rooting against the entire time also kind of got bad stuff. That's an unfulfilling movie. We can flip all of this material and make your case fall because it is logically prior that you are actually enjoying it, and you're not going to enjoy a Ghibli movie because it is unengaging, because it is confusing. We enjoy different material than children do. And we've also heard that, like, we want adults to engage with this material. Fundamentally, we think that an adult engaging with the movie is them sitting at the back of the theatre while their kid watches it, or just sitting there scrolling on reels while their kid watches it. We're not super stressed about how they engage with it. And also, like, we still see in Disney movies nods to adults and things that they enjoy. So that broadly doesn't matter. And then a quick note on triumph. We told you that we broadly believe that good triumphing over evil is what it looks like in Disney movies. And that's what's in the info side. There's been a bit of unclarity here between both sides of like where that is exclusive to. When we're talking about triumph in the Disney world, what we're looking at is like the bad guy wants to kill everyone. The bad guy wants to go to war. The good guy doesn't have the capacity to go to war. And they have a conversation and they convince them, hey, let's not go to war. War is bad. And then good triumph because they didn't get curb stomped in a war. Like, that is still very much good triumphing because they are taking away from bad doing their thing and they are like still alive. We still think that counts as good triumphing, and we still think that is reinforcing positive ideas. And so let's look at the influence on children's morals. Our broad line here has been that when you reinforce positive ideas and when you de-enforce negative ideas, you tell children what to do. You tell them that it is bad to hit your friends and that it is good to be honest. These are things that we value simply because they lead to like an actually functioning society. Society wouldn't work properly if everyone was incredibly selfish, if everyone was a horrible person, if everyone just went around hitting people every time they didn't like them. The main response here we've heard is that like conflict resolution is going to be harmed and that drawing conclusions is really important. On drawing conclusions, we broadly don't think that this is incredibly important for children because children are really just trying to be told what to do, what is good and what is bad. We don't believe that they have the capacity to draw their own conclusions. We believe that the strength, the flow state, doing something slightly more difficult than you're normally able to do for a child is like learning addition. We don't think that that is the same as drawing broad moral ideas about what is good and what is bad from a grey picture, a muddy picture of what we're actually looking at. So we don't think that stands. And then we've heard that children making mistakes is good. Well, we want children to like make mistakes and learn, but we also don't want children to be intensely horrible people. We think that the benefit that we get here is we're telling people that bad behavior is bad, but also in children, in Disney media, we can still have like someone making a mistake, realizing they're wrong and improving as a person and seeing that as a moral good. So we can still have that on our side of the house. So this final thing on like conflict resolution. In Disney media, and this kind of builds on that triumph idea, we see a good conflict resolution in Disney media as like a proportional response, not being a bad person, i.e. not hitting your friend because they lied to you, rather than the like conflict resolution of no real resolution, everyone gets a low-key mid-result. We don't believe that that is a benefit. We believe that we see clear conflict resolution, which is extremely valuable for children because they're not going to be able to understand a nuanced idea in the same way. And also, you can still get like violent conflict resolution from Ghibli. Like, violent conflict resolution in Ghibli is still very, very possible because we're still having this like moral grey area. And then finally, we've got this like Marvel example, which we appreciate them for bringing up because they've told us that like Marvel, that has good and evil and they have violence. Yeah, and then they made an entire movie about griping with the moral problems of being the Avengers and whether they, you know, tearing up an entire city was a good or bad thing. And they showed nuance in that. So that is clearly Ghibli media because we have no idea, you know, Ant-Man ended up in prison but fought for the right thing, and then Captain America went free but then kills people. We don't know. That's Ghibli media because we think that that is an inherently nuanced and unclear, muddy method of conflict resolution. And so let's finally move on to like, we think we've won that point of clash very clearly because we're showing influence on good morals, we're showing impact that come from your actions, and we think we value that incredibly highly because we want children to be good people. We don't want our children to just get hit in school because someone felt like hitting them. We want to reinforce good morals. That is not only ramifications for the society that the children live in, but also we just want our children to be doing good things. Now let's look at, like, adults. We told you right from first material about how what we're doing is we're giving people a toolkit to deal with nuanced issues once they become an adult. Because we agree that the adult world is far more complicated. But the problem is, how are you, on your side of the house, going to deal with issues in the adult world and find it kind of decide their value and goodness by the sum of their parts if you don't understand the value of the sum of the parts? What we're telling you here is we give you the toolbox to see, okay, this person, use the stealing example, this person is stealing from a supermarket because they don't have the capacity to pay for your food. The only resolution you can have on the Ghibli side of the house is, well, I'm not really sure, that's kind of interesting. On our side of the house, you can break it down. You can go, okay, look, they're stealing, that's wrong, but they're stealing to provide for their family need to eat. Okay, broadly, I'm alright with this action. We're allowed to get people to break down an action by the sum of its parts and evaluate it and see if they think it's a good thing or a bad thing, because they're able to train as a child by looking at very clear actions, which they get from the positive reinforcement, the clear reinforcement that you don't have on your side of the house. So we see adults broadly making better decisions. Adults making decisions which are actually not being paralyzed by choice. They're able to look at it clearly and decide, which we see as very important because we acknowledge that the world is grey and we acknowledge that people are grey. And so now we're allowing people to get out into the real world and see what's really happening, see if a person is good and see if a person is bad. And then the final thing that we've got here is this idea of, like, basically disappointment, that you're going to get into the real world and then you're going to be disappointed. But, like, we broadly value a child doing a good thing and then potentially not being rewarded in the exact same way they expected, than then just not doing the good thing at all. Like, we want people to be doing good things that benefit society, and we think that because they've had these so deeply ingrained in them, because children's media influences them so much, we actually think they will keep doing this, and we want people to be doing good stuff, even if they don't necessarily get the same reward. That might not be just, but it is giving a good benefit for society. Thank you very much.
Awesome, I thank the speaker for that speech, and I call upon the third speaker from the negative team.
F's children leaves kids behind. Children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who are put on the back foot of morality and are shunned as villains by their peers, which means they are less likely to see help, they are less likely to cooperate, and they're less likely to listen. Team Hawke's Bay tells you these are the kids that are most vulnerable in today's debate, the people we want to be encouraged, that perception that they can change, that perception that they can be a good person, that perception that they are not the villain. What questions do we have today? Firstly, who engages children in this media more? Secondly, firstly, what does this media look like? Because I think this characterization has widely been a bit messy. Secondly, though, who engages children more? And thirdly, the outcomes on children's behaviour. Alright, firstly then, what does this media look like? Because I think we had a very, nice characterization from F, where it was sort of like all this media is good and is usually made with good intentions, and therefore we're likely to get proportional cause and effect sort of flow on effects, right? I genuinely I think it's kind of preposterous that they think there's no negative incentives to create bad children's media, because yes there is. Children are extremely malleable because of the reasons we gave you. This is where Isabel's material becomes really important about how we get better media, because they don't rely on this gimmick. Having two binaries is incredibly easy to do. It requires little to no thought. You're able to easily distinguish. We flip their material about how this becomes more accessible at the point in which you lose that critical thinking skill. That's incredibly important because it is through consuming media and it is through interacting with the world we get that. Furthermore, creators are more likely to opt into this mind-numbing content, which is why we get cheap generic things like Cocomelon, those weird YouTube kids videos that are being produced, and on their side they have to stand for that. Secondly on this though, they try to claim that, like, on their side of the house, it's not always extreme. Like, we're going to get a sort of, like, we're going to have good people and bad people, but not to such an extreme binary, right? If they want to claim this as a benefit in today's debate, they have to minimize all that material about how stuff becomes more accessible, about how the media becomes more engaging, because you can easily identify morals. At the point in which that binary is limited, it becomes a lot harder for children to distinguish, which is why on side neg, we believe that these binaries are useless anyways, and we have given you mechanisms as to why we are better, right? But secondly, we're more likely to have extreme binaries, as Isabella said, because it is this like cheap writing gimmick that like people can use in order to get things. That's what we claimed under there. At the end of this point, we're able to prove to you that like a Ghibli media en masse is probably going to be better at the point in which they have that competition mechanism of like needing it to be understandable, because like Hollywood's never going to greenlight something that no one understands. There are multiple processes, checks and balances. They probably have to test it on an audience first before it gets released. We have proven why that's the case. Before I move on, a point if you have one. Okay, next point then about who engages children more. This is incredibly important in today's debate, because if we can prove to you that children need that stimulation, they need to think about the media they're consuming after they consumed it, we win, because the children are thinking about it more and they're able to implement it more in their lives. What have we heard? We heard there is a clear punishment and reward mechanism in the movies that they provide. Two things. Firstly, Isabella gave you great material that has gone critically unresponded to about the cultural differences in which the reward and the problem can vary based on like where you're from, like that individualistic versus collectivist mindset. That is important when you are in the playground and you're interacting from kids with different backgrounds who grow up with these ideals that are not similar to your own. We want to be charitable to those people. We don't want to view them as that they're sort of doing a moral wrong and not wanting to engage, right? Secondly though, to build on this, punishment is what creates the high expectations on children. As I flagged before, when you have this strong punishment mechanism, which if they want to claim that it works, they have to also stand for the fact it's quite strong, we believe that it makes kids who do bad things think that they cannot change, that they are stagnant in their behavior, and they are less likely to maybe go home and evaluate their actions. When a teacher comes up to them and is like, hey, you can't hit that kid, they're more likely to retaliate. They're more likely to be stuck in that that villain mindset, because they know they're not going to change. What do we hear on this as a pushback, right? We heard that sort of there are ways in which character development happens where the bad guys sometimes figures out that they can be good at the end. We believe, firstly, this is less likely to be the case at which the resolution usually comes at the end of the movie. As I flagged in my POI, right? You're at the end of the movie, usually the bad guy dies, like we see in The Lion King or in The Little Mermaid. They have to contend with this. There is usually no actual resolution to that problem, because you've created the binary mechanism as to which evil has to be defeated. We saw this in the info slide. It has to triumph. The ultimate form of triumph is death, is elimination, is no more. This locks out all their benefits about changing. Right. Lastly then, they tried to assert here that kids love Disney movies because they're not all relatable and they can have these fun characters. Firstly, debate is not about Disney Corporation, therefore they have to stand for companies with less money who are able to pull this off to a lesser extent. But secondly, no, we told you in Shika that people are more able to make the connection with people that are more relatable to you at the point in which those people look like your friends, because at the age in which you're at, you still think that fiction is reality, so you're more likely to see someone as your friend at the point in which they make mistakes that you make. Oh, I've accidentally pushed in front of someone before, I can empathize with you. At the end of this point, we've proven that we're able to engage children more in media, which is incredibly important. We get those benefits, yes.
Why do you value someone feeling better about doing something bad over someone just not doing the bad thing in the first place?
People who usually do bad things are the people who come from backgrounds where it is encouraged. People who grow up in gangs. People who grow up with parents who are criminals. We want these are the people that we are able to uniquely change on our side of the house through this type of media. Lastly then, on outcomes for children, because we heard it third, they tried to push this sort of proportional response in Disney movies and how it's important that they're not going to have huge outcomes that's sort of symmetric. Firstly, this is not likely to happen, as we explained explained to you about the extreme binary. But secondly, not all actions in life have a proportional response, which is why we say things like, don't stoop to the level of the bully, because we as adults know that bullies go through things like that sort of like kids with good moral values are like less likely to go through. Kids with good moral values are more likely to come from loving families, more likely to do that sort of thing. Right. And they tried to argue better conflict resolution because, like, seen as hitting someone is bad. As stated in my Marvel POI, like, good people on their side hit and kill people all the time. We see, like, Marvel superheroes, Spider-Man, killing their villains, and, like, it teaches you that, like, the right thing to, like, is to prove yourself right at all times. This is great for debating, right? But, like, if you're trying to implement this as a child, it's, like, less likely you're always going to have that compilation to be right all the time. On our side, though, we don't reward bad behavior or misidentified morals for two reasons. Firstly, children are infamously good at asking questions. If they don't understand something, they'll just tell their parents, oh, why does that happen? Oh, why did this guy do this action? And that is genuinely good at provokes discussion. Secondly, if it's confusing, it doesn't get made because Hollywood is incredibly cutthroat. Lastly, then, about this really weird benefit of adults, because this is a huge logical leap in the debate where we believe that children's media is a very small part of someone's life. We've never proved that. We don't need to prove that adults necessarily benefit. Even if it did, though, we're more likely to get rounded adults because they're engaging with these critical thinking skills from a very young age, more malleable. Who was the side that protects the most vulnerable? It was Team Hawke's Bear.
Awesome, I thank Steve for that speech, and now we'll reverse the order, call upon the leader of the negative team to give their reply speech.
I think a few things I'm going to look at in this debate are firstly the way in which children consume this media and the kind of stimulation that they're getting. Secondly, what does it look like in the reward and punishment system that the affirmative team loves, and how does this result in the actions that you're going to do? How does this impact conflict resolution? And just lastly, on morality, and if there are other ways of getting the kind of basic morals that the affirmative team prioritizes. I think firstly, when we look at stimulation and engaging with the materials, what we heard from the affirmative team is well, no, children are just going to engage with the materials regardless. Yes, this is not the clash. The clash that we have told you throughout this debate is whether or not you are going to be mindlessly consuming this material, or whether you are going to be stimulating your brain, thinking about the material, not just in the moment, but in the future. We gave you multiple mechanisms about the relatability aspects of it, about how Ghibli allows you to consider things for yourself. I think this is important when you consider that, and therefore on our side of the house, we get children who are actively using their critical thinking skills. We get children who are able to improve their literacy skills and who are able to take on board the sort of things that we teach them through Ghibli media. Secondly, in terms of what this media looks like, I think firstly, let's just say that this media isn't that realistic, right? What we've told you down the line is that the kind of good and evil, and you get a reward if you're good and you get a punishment if you're evil, isn't actually realistic in the real world. It doesn't matter what happens in the media. It's whether or not that's going to be reflected in real life, because we've explained to you how children then come to expect certain outcomes, and they get frustrated and they get sad and they get lost when they don't get that outcome that they need. We've given you mechanisms about how it is, the cultural differences result in these different sort of ideas of morality, and how life experiences and just simply experiencing trauma as a child change your morals. It changes your concepts of good and bad, which means that when you are unlikely to always receive the exact same idea. And it's further more important when we consider how the affirmative team are planning to win on getting children to consistently display good behaviour. We've explained to you how if just once they don't get the exact outcome they want, they are likely to simply not try again, and we didn't get any response to that. I think this results in a few things. It firstly results in that sort of frustration, but also in terms of conflict resolution. We've also explained to you how on their side of the house, the kind of media and what it looks like results in you not going for a win-win situation. And the main response we received throughout this debate is that they told us they don't like moderate, everybody gets a mid outcome. We think that we win because we prove to you that everybody getting a mid outcome is good as it benefits the most number of people. It is better than someone suffering just for someone to feel like they're on a high and on a cloud. Thirdly, on the sort of morality. I think even if you value a good and bad and having clear concepts of good and bad, we are still able to win. Why is this? Because we've told you that good and evil is learnt elsewhere and not just in media. We told you how parents prioritize teaching good and evil, how schools often have very black and white rules which explain good and evil. Ultimately, Ghibli fills in the gaps. It means that you are able to be more compassionate and you are able to deal with the situations in which good and evil may not be very clear. We think that if they are planning to win on getting children to understand morals, the very fact that it is not only being consumed through media means that they do not win. And the ultimate response that we have from them is to just say the media is the best method of getting it and it is the most engaging. I think all of the work that we have done to show how Ghibli is more stimulating, how Disney optimism is just simply unengaging, we've given you the example of Cocomelon. You are not likely to take the morals on board and really consider them. Other mechanisms actually do a much better job of that. And on-site affirmative, we help give children a realistic expectation when they go into the real world.
Awesome, thanks to speak for that speech, and I call upon the leader of the affirmative team to conclude this debate.
Nick wanted to tell us that they protect vulnerable children, that they make it so that children are less stressed. However, on side affirmative, we think that first of all, that just children doing less very bad things is probably the most important thing. But first of all, I'm just going to talk a lot about their engagement and stimulation, right? So they told us that, engagement and stimulation is going to be, is something that is really important because on our side, they're just not going to be engaging with this media. But I think we gave you several responses to this. First of all, at SIB, we told you how there can still be twists and turns and development in these stories, which is very interesting and engaging for a child. At Jaskirin, we told you how children have a lower bar for engagement, so they are more likely to engage with the media, even if it is less engaging. At first, we talked about all of the incentives which act on companies to make it engaging because they need to be able to sell this media and market it to children and parents. Right? They already know how to create this engaging media and they're going to be doing it. So we think it is very clear it will be created in such a way that children will want to engage with it and they will want to watch it. And as such, I think that this is evidence to the fact that they will always be looking at us then. Let's then go and look at their harms, right? So they told us, well, children are probably going to be very stressed and confused on our side of the house when they don't get exactly the rewards that they want, or when maybe their morals misalign with what the things that they're seeing on TV. A few responses to this. First of all, in terms of stress and confusion, I think we can probably weigh this out of the debate when we tell you that media is a really big part of the way we decide what is and isn't moral. Your parents can tell you some things, but when we can prove that that message is reinforced significantly by media, I think we do prove that we reduce the number of children who are doing violent things. And as we've talked about this consistently throughout the debate, that should be what is weighing most heavily on your mind, because that is a very concrete impact compared to the stress that they give you. Second of all, they tell you that this bad behavior is just reinforced on our side of the house. However, I think this clearly isn't the case. First of all, less people are probably doing it in the first place because they clearly understand the rewards which are associated with doing good things and the punishments which are associated with doing bad things. But second of all, I think it's probably so less people are getting into the trap to begin with. But second of all, I think that it's probably quite clear that even if this wasn't the case, children don't always expect exactly what they see on the screen, right? They probably expect some reward to the extent that they're being punished. But finally, third of all, right, at the point when you think, well, this child has been punished once, they're never going to act again. Well, no, because now they have this underlying belief that what they did is bad, right? Now they know that this is something we can correct. And I think we told you on the side that the triumph is good is not always just killing somebody. It is the triumph of the people who were doing good throughout the story, right? It looks like someone maybe being excluded from a group because they were really awful to them. In the case of a school story, that maybe looks like someone losing a lot of money because they were cheating lots of people throughout the film. These responses do not have to be violent, but they do need to clearly draw a line between what is and isn't good behavior and reinforce that in the mind of the student, and I think that is a very clear path to victory for us. Finally then, when we're talking about, so finally I've weighed all of this material on stress, so now I'm going to just talk a little bit more about why we think that this moral gaps thing, because they told us that Ghibli is just going to be filling in the gaps. A few responses to this down the line. First of all, we told you that Ghibli is confusing. They cannot support a consistent and clear moral message. Therefore, the message which you take away from it as an underdeveloped child is whatever you appeals to you. This doesn't necessarily mean you take away that the good person is doing the right thing, but maybe just the cool bad person is doing the good thing. Second of all, when there isn't a clear punishment or reward system, they are not taught or framing around that. They are not taught or reinforce these issues. Therefore, it is probably more confusing on their side when a child does not have any idea of the clear impact of their actions or the actions of these characters in their films. At the end of the day, side affirming draws a clear line between what is right and what is wrong, and that's why we win this debate.
Awesome, I thank the speaker for that debate and both teams for an excellent debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands, bump elbows, give each other nods. And if you could all leave the room, I'll call you back in momentarily for the discussion.
Great job, well done, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Great debate.
yeah. One debate to go.
Guys, is it Ghibli or Ghibli? I don't know.